Intro. A college spring semester. Honestly, just a continuation of what you did last semester, but this time was a mix of weather since it's winter and spring. So it's still a social setting, but it's just more inside now because it's really cold at the start of it. Then it gets warmer over time, so you get a taste of it right before the summer break. But now we can talk about how the semester went this time. It's always different, but this semester I would say I had a pretty consistent schedule, the complete opposite of last semester. But I still took the normal 5 classes and all that, but for reference, this was my schedule. One thing I can say beforehand is the simple schedule might have been why the semester, in my opinion, was less fun. My theory is that whenever there's a less consistent schedule, it's more fun because it's more spontaneous. It makes every day feel like a different adventure, really, even though that's corny, instead of really only having two separate types of days. Picture this. You have to take a math class, but you don't really want to take a full level math course because why would you? That was the situation I was in when I picked mathematics and society, or this course. I've always been good at math because I've always had good grades, but it feels like college math classes would have been a little harder. So I decided not to take stats or something like that because it would have been a little harder and kind of unnecessary. Anyways, this course is really easy, and I had to take it my freshman year since that's the only time you can take it. One of the main things I learned about was truth tables and how to make them. A truth table is basically setting everything to true or false and making a chart out of it to see every value that could happen in a scenario. That's really all it is. It's pretty easy to make. You could probably look up examples and get what you have to do from that. Since it is that easy, but other than that, there's not really too much to truth tables. Then we learn about things relating to graphs and such, but nothing too complicated. We just learned about the different types of graphs, which, by the way, if you didn't know, were like the pie graph and the other ones that you would learn in like third grade. If you know how many graphs, if you know how graphs are, you basically already know this whole section, and you'll be all set since this is really just seen as review at this point. So out of all the graphs, the cat and whiskers one is the one least known about because it mainly has to do with stats and lower medians, all that pizzazz for making it. But speaking of stats, we also learned little about that, but nothing too much like a whole class would do it if it was dedicated to it. Standard deviation can be found by using a long process that takes a few tries to get down, but you just have to add up the numbers and do some equations. Nothing too important that you wouldn't learn in a stats class. It's really easy once you get it down, but that's about all the important stuff we learned for that section. But my friend and I didn't have to go in after we finished the final early, kind of. So the last thing we really learned was the way you could tell what shape something was, which is easier than you think. If it has flat sides, it's a prism, and if it has angled sides, then it's a pyramid. Just put that after the shape it is, and bam. It was a fun time, considering that it's not an actual math class, and it was really, really easy. It also just kind of got me to school in the morning, to be honest, on Mondays and Wednesdays. It was like that for my Italian class last semester, where me and my friend were the only ones active, which makes a little bit of sense since it's a math class, but nobody really wants to be there. You just kind of have to do it, and since most majors have to do a higher level class, this one is full of extra people who don't want to be there. Except for one person who did seem very energetic during my math class, but was still in third place for most questions answered and like whatnot, like activity. Me and my friend were really the main ones answering, but that's whatever. I could really care less. It could have been a little more fun, but I had fun with it really, so it doesn't matter to me specifically. But luckily, we got off scot-free was the final by finishing it early. We had to make a portfolio for the final, but he let us get out early because of this one simple trick. That is having one really big assignment instead of 3. He told us this beforehand, that his wife helps him make his decisions on things, and that being worth enough was one of those, so I'm kind of lucky it passed, but that's besides the point. I'm just glad I have no more math. Overall for the class, I would say the Monday and Wednesday portion of the class was the weaker part of the class, but Fridays were a different type of class. It was something called SI Correct or whatever, I don't know. I'm done with that. These were more simple and more of a review for math. You honestly really would have known. One of the questions was, what is 1/4 in percentage? By the way, it's 25%. It was always 10 questions that were some basic formulas and stuff you already knew because you graduated high school. Me and my friend would race to see which one of us finished first. I would always win most of the time, but that's all that really matters on Fridays. But it did help me get some old knowledge out of me for a little bit. What that knowledge is, I can't say right now, but it worked. But usually the fun part of Fridays came after the class, since me and my friend would go to the grocery store on a little fun adventure, we could call it, in quote. I pointed out one day that we always go on Fridays and asked him why, and he said, oh, I guess it's just whenever I get money. He would, of course, say this right before checking his card balance on speakerphone at his bank, which was insane. But other than that, the class was usually fun. So in terms of difficulty, I'd give it a 1 out of 10. But in fun, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. Overall, a good class. And I'm glad was no more math, as I said before. So that's the only reason I took this, instead of being forced to take stats or something else later on. Now, this is the class I had on Monday, but I had two options as what class I could take. I was told I could either take this or another class called pre-production. So this class, I was like, I'll just get it over with. Probably the wrong choice, but that's whatever. It's over right now. I'll get into why I had to make that decision later, because it was because of one of my other classes. But I did have to take this class for my major, which makes sense because I don't even know what this class was going to be about. Even after taking the class, I only have a vague idea about what it's actually about. It's really just the different ways people see and interpret messages and different things. I guess I can see why I would have to take it, maybe. Though the class does feel more like a PR class, which is a different major, than anything else. It was still useful to know why things worked, but the problem is, like, I don't like tooting my own horn, but I feel like for me, it's better to not know how things work, but go off of instinct. But that's just me, honestly, so not everyone. But one of the things I do remember from this class was semiotics, which is like how we interpret a lot of things, is like our sight and stuff. It's all mainly stuff in your mind and things like that, because we're all hardwired the same. Oh, don't think you're different, because we both interpret stuff the same way, whether you like it or not. It's like when you see the color blue, what do you usually associate it with? I'll give you a second. False, it's a warmer feeling, or something like sadness or an emotion. Depends on what it is you're looking at and all that stuff in the context. Also, Kanye got mentioned a lot in this class, and not for good reason, since you know where he is. I learned a lot of interesting quotes from him, since they were kind of mentioned on what not to do and talk to an audience. But I don't think there is a need to say them. But anyways, I also got to play VR in the class, which was cool. I played Super Hot, but couldn't figure out what to do on one level, somewhat due to nervousness. That's a different thing. But on the flip side, it was a fun way to send it off. Also, the last class was just watching the GTA 6 trailer, so we got to leave really early. But other than that, it was more of a lecture class. But the type of lecture is better than the majority of classes I've taken that are just lectures. This one was more of an interactive lecture, which means in my terms that it's a lecture, but it actually matters if you participate or not, since it leads to a conversation. Those conversations usually guide the class and go to each topic, which makes the lecture. I would say that the more fun way of teaching a class is this, but also my teacher said he would have weekly tests, which at the start of the semester is pretty scary, but he only gave out 5 in the 16 to 18 weeks that this semester was. And the whole class just went on. So I guess he was just lying or something. But that just happened. But what can you really do about it? Not everyone is able to do what they say. But other than that, it was a small class because most people who are film majors probably took the other message design class or pre-production. It was still fun even if only half the class showed up for all the classes. But I'm pretty sure I, along with like one or two other people, actually showed up for every class on time. I don't know if that's really a flex or not. The class overall was more fun, but I didn't participate the most in it since, some other people really like to do that. But for difficulty, I'd give it like a 4 out of 10 at most, since once you understand what you're talking about, it's just the why you do that and like why and what. For fun, I would say 8 out of 10, since participation such, but also I heard the other class was boring, so I'm kind of glad I didn't take that one, because it was also 3 hours long. English, but again, honestly. Luckily, the class structure was exactly like it was last semester, but now was a different teacher. This time it was 5 papers, and I could tell one thing about the class. It was no different than the non-honors version, because why would it be? You just need something to say it's honors in order for it to count. This may also be because it's a basic class, but still. One of my friends from last semester has the class after it, and it's the exact same, and it's not an honors one. What a cool little class gatekeeping moment. Nothing better than that. Really, you can ignore all the first papers and all that, really, because what matters is the last 2 papers. But I can briefly go over the topics for the first 3 papers. The first one was just analyzing some advertisement or something. I picked Dior and said that the ads make men feel like men, I guess. I specifically picked the Robert Pattinson one because emasculating, I guess. For the second paper, it was just forming a narrative was your identity, I think. It's hard to remember, but all I know is that for it, I had to form the idea of how our identities actually affect our lives. Which, is a good thing to know about no matter who you are. You are affected in one way or another, somehow, whether you like it or not. But some people don't acknowledge that. Now, for the third paper, just kidding, the third one got canceled. It would have been just a revision of the second one, but he didn't want us working during spring break in, like, the week we had off. So that was an easy 100 for a paper, but it was to teach us how to revise, which isn't too hard, so I wouldn't have really needed it. I always just submit drafts early so I can get a higher grade on the actual paper. The fourth paper was when it got easier. It's like writing a video essay, which I really don't know how to do, but you just compare 2 media sources. So I did it on Breaking Bad's pilot and Breaking Bad's Ozymandias, comparing Walter White's greed and the bad stuff that he has grown to be. That was a 5-page paper, so nowhere close to what these real analyzers are doing. But then comes the final project. Another presentation. Just like message design, but this time it's just to accompany a paper and isn't graded. So basically, just like message design, but without the grading. I did mine on the idea of public transportation in American cities, which if you know my thoughts on that, you know that I think it could easily be improved. But of course, I was tired when he was explaining the way the slides were supposed to be formed, so I fully fumbled the presentation, but whatever. I learned from it because I had a bunch of other presentations as finals. After that, I was fine since I finished the papers, and then after, I was all set. Luckily, now I don't have any more writing classes because I just finished that one. Overall, for fun, I would say it was fun since I sat with my friend, so I would give it a 7 out of 10 since there were lectures, mainly with some participation. But in terms of difficulty, it depends on the writer and how you write stuff. So about like a 5 out of 10 was like an asterisk. Now for my personal favorite topic when it comes to the classes I took this semester, U.S. History 2, which is everything past the Civil War, which is actually interesting stuff. Sorry historians, it's just kind of true. Though it was also this class that made me realize this semester is going to be all about the media and all that stuff. Mainly because that's what this class also talked about. It went over the media and how it portrayed the United States and certain events to sway public opinions, or whatever. But honestly, it was really just a different perspective than what I learned in high school. In high school, we mainly just went over events leading up to the Vietnam War, but now we just talk about how the press helped or didn't was the president. One of those ways was the infamous Bay of Pigs invasion during JFK's presidency. They kind of just hid over it because JFK was a liked president, even though he really did nothing. In my opinion, LBJ is better domestically, but that's besides the point. The media mainly covered the presidents they liked and stuff, so, just a little bit of bias. The type of class this was is an interesting one because, yeah, it was a lecture with some close to not too much interaction, but it was on an interesting subject. So honestly, it depends on if you like this period of U.S. history or not. If you do, I would say a lecture is interesting enough for how it can be covered, since it's just your regular old slideshow presentation, but with somebody who knows what it is. But that's really only 80% of the class, since the other 20% of the class is about post-Watergate society. Watergate, the infamous scandal, the book I had to buy, and then I couldn't return. Thank you, Watergate book, for misprinting and not being able to be used. The only book I had to buy for the class was not put to use because of something that went wrong with it. It was originally going to be used for something called election games, but because of this little error that really didn't happen. But that sure is unfortunate, but there's not much I can do, I guess. I also learned because of this class that FDR is the best U.S. president we've had so far. Hoping we can have one as good as him soon, since we might need it. But I think my favorite acts from the presidencies I learned about have to be the Social Security Act and the Medicare and Medicaid Act, since they actually help a lot of people. There's a lot more acts that could be covered, but these are my personal favorites. I think we need a whole new system when it comes to it, but that's another video topic, so I won't get into it now. So after Watergate, the government really can't be trusted, and that's what the American people decided because it's corrupt. So because they go to different places to get their news and their different stuff, we learned about those as well. One of those being gangs and why people joined them, considering they became big places, or big in places like the Bronx in New York City and like Chicago. People mainly joined gangs because of the sense of connection it gave in a difficult time, especially in the 70s. Most people also joined because of their economic status and a few other things that they can't really control. It really is sad to see that people aren't able to be stable and only have these options to turn to as outlets for the most part. We did go jump roping one time. That was fun, even though I don't know how to jump rope. The last 3 weeks of class really were the home stretch of the class because we just did a bunch of activities and things instead of conventional lectures and stuff. This was the more fun part of the class, but less interesting in my honest opinion. But it also happened because it was warming up outside. But after all the class, it was still very fun and interesting since I liked that topic. I already knew most of the stuff in terms of history-wise, but not how the media portrayed these things. For difficulty, I would say like a 5 out of 10 was an asterisk, because if you have prior knowledge, it won't be too difficult. For fun, I would say a 7 out of 10 was an asterisk again, because you have to have an interest in it for it to be fun. The second and last language class I had to take. Luckily, I still kind of wish they offered other languages like German or Japanese, since I was in the process of learning those before I went to Italian. But it gets my language credits done, since I was forced to take 2 language classes for the honors program or whatever. But now for the fun pre-part of the class. This class, as shown before, only ran from 12:30 to 1:45 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Of course, this is the one block I would have needed open to take message design and pre-production, as mentioned earlier. Pre-production just being a continuation on the film path, so I had to choose one or the other, and looking back on it, I foolishly chose message design. So life lesson, I guess, if you're on a path with people you know, don't get off the path unless you have to, because now that I chose message design, I don't know anybody in the pre-production class I have to take. That's really the lesson I learned. But I guess I can grow from it. I put my finger up. Mistakes are something you are supposed to grow from. But now, about the Italian class. As you would expect, the class is cumulative in just remembering what you learned last semester, but now with 3 new sections that are all important. We only really got to chapter 6 of the book from what we've been doing the exercise from. Chapter 3 and 4 were the first sections we reviewed and went over ERE and IRE verbs and just the basics like how to conjugate them and stuff like that. But that's basic stuff. Chapter 4 is about sport and knowing vocabulary about it. That's what half of the class was structured like, really. Just vocabulary, with the other half being a new concept or ways to mess with the words. I say this because the other half was time vocabulary and modal verbs. Modal verbs give every German learner flashbacks because of their stupid grammar rules with them. But luckily that's not the case with Italian. It's very similar, if not the same, to English, where you use the infinitive of the second verb in the sentence. Like when you say, I want to go to the movies. You say to go instead of go because want is the first verb. Basically the same for Italian with want, can, and need. You just need to use the infinitive of the verb. Then there were terms like for the weather. The second part was using verbs in the past, which is a different conjugation. You put atto, uto, or ito at the end of the verb depending on its ending. But then we learnt about music stuff and direct objects. It's just saying it, but you use the word you use for the in place of the object. You also do this kinda for when you refer to something that was already talked about. So that's really all chapter 5 was. It wasn't too much, a pretty easy section. But then there's chapter 6, which was the rushed section we had. Chapter 6 had easy parts, but it had hard parts. Like the party terms and holiday terms were easy, but remembering what was unique about the Italian versions of them is harder. The chapter mainly focused on the past and not really too much on the present tense. But the easiest part of chapter 6 had to be the adverbs and how to make them. You just put mente at the end of whatever word you want to make an adverb, and bam, you have it. There's some exceptions, but you can look at a chart or something for that. And it's for the Italian that beginners need to know, I guess. There is no intermediate class, and also I wouldn't have been able to take it anymore anyways because of credits. But that's really it. The class did help me learn more rules about Romance languages overall for the next time I try to learn one, so that was useful. But I'm still trying to find somewhere I could use Italian. I will try to retain as much knowledge as I can remember, though, because I don't want it to be for waste. But it's a good thing to know for other Romance languages like Spanish or Portuguese. For fun in the class, I would say it was a little fun because it was an interactive lecture, like the most languages classes are. So I'd give it like a 6 out of 10. But for difficulty, I would say it's harder than the previous one because I had a month off from Italian, so I needed to get back into the groove of things. I would give it an 8 out of 10 for difficulty. The club fair was held inside the semester, but I used it to just see what other clubs are active at the school. Of course, there are all during times that I already have clubs, so not too many new clubs, just 2. I was interested in seeing if the K-pop club is a social club or an activity club, so I signed up for that one because me and my friend wanted to be more social and outgoing. Was jazz hands. Then we also signed up for the Crafters Club since that also looked to be a social club, and we got a free squishy toy with it. Though it was the club that was held later, so I had to stay for longer than I would have wanted on the days it was active, but at least it got me out of the rush hour traffic. Luckily I stayed inside the other clubs, so no need to see what they were doing. As mentioned before, there really are just 2 types of clubs, social clubs and activity-based clubs. I went to 4 clubs this semester, those being the Crafters Club, the Writers Club, the Pokemon Club, and the K-pop Club. Out of these, half are social clubs and half are activity clubs. So not too difficult or different really, but I call it the expanding network method, or whatever cool name it can be called was an acronym. But I guess I can go in the order I had them in throughout the week, which starts us off with the crafting club. This club definitely is a more social club, so socialization is kind of a key player in making or breaking your experience. I had friends who went to the club, so I wasn't alone, but I also didn't make any new friends in the club, though I wasn't expecting to be honest, it was just for fun. It was fun, since I am an avid enjoyer of crafting. I just don't know things that I would want to make, or how I would want to craft them. So at least it helped me find some cool things I could do. Made some bracelets there, specifically with relevant sayings on them at the time. And yes, this semester it was around the same time that the Minecraft movie came out. So you can guess what we put on those bracelets. The club was a club that passed the time on Tuesdays, so I had a fun time. As mentioned before, it got me out of rush hour traffic, which might actually be the devil in disguise. So I would say it's fun for having a good time overall. I'll probably continue going to it, but next up is the writing club, or the creative writing club, whatever, which is basically the same as last semester. Was not much changed. The only thing I would say that changed was less people went overall, but that's also because some people graduated. It started out strong, but then the number of people who came gradually declined over time. It happens, but the club still stayed a very social dependent club with some activities, but they weren't really required. It was just an extra thing that if you wanted to do, you could do it, but not like you had to. Overall, I would say if you write or want to socialize, then a club like this is good, but it depends on how people hold it and stuff. Next up would be the Pokemon Club, which is basically the definition of an activity club. A club that doesn't have too much socialization, but is fun for the activities they have instead. I still don't know enough about Pokemon to get the full list out of it, but it's still fun. Like, personally, I have a fun time. I would say these fan clubs are more for the hardcore fans or people who know a lot more than the average folk. It's good for Pokemon fans and whatnot, which I am. I'm a fan, but not a stan. But that's a conversation for a different day, really, because I don't really understand how anybody can be a stan. Speaking of stan culture, that brings us to a topic very closely related to it. That idea of being K-pop groups and standing for them. And that leads to the final club that I went to this semester. K-pop club is the one club where I was like, I listen to the music occasionally. I like the idea of it, but I know nothing about these bands and whatnot. Like, I don't know the people. I don't need to know too much about it. Maybe it would be a social-esque club to have fun. I mean, it was kind of, but not really. It was structured like Pokemon Club, really, where it's based off of activities and such. Same deal as the previous one, since I don't know a lot about this, like, other than some songs I like. It was more just kind of playing along or finding my own thing to do. I just went for the songs after a certain point, but I mean, if someone is into stan culture and K-pop culture, then this would be good for them, like a good fit. Overall, not for me, but like not a bad club either. Though I will have to deal with rush hour traffic now that I won't be going to it, since it was held at the same time as the Crafters Club. Clubs are still fun and would recommend checking clubs out, since, you know, college is a social experience and all that other cool stuff you can hear on YouTube. Overall, college is still good. Should go to it if you want to pursue an education. Same stuff as last semester, honestly. Nothing really changed. It's like if your major is a competitive field or whatnot, then go to get a leg up. But if not, IDK. Just do your own thing, I guess. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And that's it. Goodbye.